All right. So, continuing our series of Metro Division crossovers with our fellow Locked On hosts, we are thrilled to welcome Hunter Hodes from Locked On Penguins to see what the Pens are looking like this season. Thanks for joining us, Hunter.
Yeah, thank you for having me, both of you. This is, I think, the only second time there's been a Locked On Flyers Penguins crossover in the 3 years that I've been doing this, but it's definitely well overdue. So I'm glad to be here with you all.
Yeah,
Right.
love the friendly rivalry that our teams have.
It's not like
So,
we're on the ice, so
yeah,
Yeah,
true, true. How did you feel about the Pens off season this year? And do you think, along with the core that's been there, this team is poised to make another run?
yeah. I mean, I was mostly okay with the offseason. It was definitely a bit sketchy at first, just because it looked like Evgeny Malkin was not going to be coming back. Some a little bit dicey with the Crystal Tang negotiations too, but they were able to get both of them back, which was, I think, the right call. You're not going to find any better value than those two players at their respective positions on the free agent or the trade market. Brian Rust also came back. Rickard Rakell came back. And then they really went to work on their defense. It was something that I didn't think they were going to do too much, but it was evident, at least to me, that the management didn't like that they were kind of pushed around in that Rangers series and some of the mistakes that some of the defensemen made. They were kind of like, okay, we kind of want to make some changes there. And I think right now, if you look at the D compared to last year, I personally think it's a better unit with Jeff Petrie and Ty Smith coming in. Petrie has the potential to play just the way he did under Marty St. Louis when he was almost a point per game player after that really rough start to the season. Couple of the depth moves I wasn't really too big of a fan of, like signing Josh Archibald on day one of free agency and losing Evan Rodriguez for cheap, even though he was a really solid player these last couple of years for this team, and I think that absence is going to be really felt this season.
He
But
he
when I
was
look
one
at the
guy that I really thought the Flyers should go after.
he's an all-around good player. You can stick him at center, stick him at wing, almost any line, basically. Maybe not your first line, but you can probably get away with him on your second, third line, especially. And he can chip in 15, 20 goals for you. Maybe he'll be inconsistent at times, but he was always a player that I really liked the Penguins having. And it's unfortunate that he got away for just a couple of million. I think that the Penguins were a bit more wiser with their money this summer, like not giving Kasperi Kapanen a 2-year deal worth 3.2 million. I think they probably would have been able to fit him in. But when I look at this team overall right now, and I look at the other teams in the Metro, I don't see a way this team finishes outside the top three, or especially the top four, unless they just really have a terrible season with injuries or some of their core players just aren't the same anymore. I don't know if they'll be able to make a run. It would be obviously great if they can make one more long run with this core, but I think they'll be good enough to especially get in the playoffs and maybe win a round, if not two, before they're probably eliminated in the conference final or soon like a final.
Yeah, I think top three could be a struggle for them. Four, I think they can get. It'll be interesting to see where that lies. I was in Pittsburgh for a couple weeks ago, so I saw a lot of camp, and I liked what I saw in camp. Actually, I was watching some skating drills, and basically the Penguins were doing camp a lot different than the Flyers. While the Flyers were trying to exhaust their guys to get them in better shape, the Penguins were going with more power skating and edge work and really like game skating kind of stuff. And I felt like that was a good idea. Now I was getting to see Owen Pickering, but he was in like the non-contact jersey because he was still had some sort of injury. But I did like what I saw out of the Penguins. I didn't think they were as hungry as last year. Last year I did predict them to make the playoffs because I saw hunger, but I do feel like they're working on some things that maybe a team like the Flyers didn't work on, and I think their camp was pretty good and practical. I don't know what the vibe was that you got from it.
Yeah, I think for camp, they're kind of just going through the motions a little bit right now. Some people were freaking out. It was funny. They got blown out by the Red Wings. Like, I think it was like their C minus team, something like that. And people were, making all these complaints about the power play and, like, why are they losing to a bunch of kids? And it's just like, they're looking like they just went to a party and got drunk the night before. I mean, they're not really taking these preseason games that seriously. And honestly, the Penguins, they kind of just glide during camp and preseason, and honestly to start the regular seasons too. They really don't hit their stride until December, January, when the games I think start to get more serious for them, especially February, March too. I think they know that they're kind of trying to preserve their legs for a bit later in the season so that they have them when those games get more important. But from a pure camp perspective, I haven't been up there to watch it just because I've been down in Virginia. I have liked what I've seen from someone like Drake Caggiula, even though we got sent down. I think Drew O'Connor should be in this team's top 12. I know he got sent down too. The big question is still what they're going to do with their defense, just because they have 9 right now. I know Frank Saravelli just reported that Ron Hextall has kind of offered him to basically any team that wants him, but that's standard GM stuff because he's putting feelers out there. That gives me the indication that Ty Smith is going to make the team. Some people are a little up in arms about that, but I think
don't know why. I mean, Ty Smith's a good defenseman.
Yeah, I mean, I know he had a rough year in New Jersey, but it's also the Devils and it's Lindy Ruff.
Yeah, it's Lindy Ruff.
Yeah. I mean, they just kind of had the same thing with Mike Matheson. He was really struggling in Florida. He comes over to Pittsburgh and then puts it all together, has the best season in his career. I know he got traded, but I think that's what the Penguins are looking for with him. They're going to just put him in the video room, show him his mistakes, babysit him on the bottom pairing with someone like Jan Ruta, who they brought in. I really like that signing too. And they'll try to see if he can get back to the way he used to play. And then I think their biggest hope is that he turns into a top 4 defenseman at some point.
He could.
What's the prevailing opinion on the Mike Sullivan contract extension? The team is kind of reaching close to the end of the core, and his term could be part of a rebuild. And is he the guy that can kind of transition from the current core to a new team?
I think he could. Some people were a little surprised by it at the time, but when you have, I think at least a top 3 coach in the league, you want to keep him for usually as long as you can. And trust me, I know these jobs they're usually very short term. You don't usually have a coach stay from 2015 when I was way smaller than I am now to now when I'm going to be 25 next month. So he's the second longest tenured coach in the league. And, there's a reason for that. He's great at his job, a masterful tactician, I think is my way to describe it. And,
the fact that Crosby likes him helps. If he didn't, then that might be a different story too.
Yeah. And, and some of the other coaching changes that they've made throughout the Crosby-Malkin era, Michel Therrien, Dan Bylsma, Mike Johnston, they've kind of just tuned them out at times. And usually you can notice it. The team just kind of stops playing hard. It just looks really weird at times, but not for Mike Sullivan. The team looked kind of dead in the water going to the playoffs last year. All of a sudden they flipped the switch and they're playing really well against the Rangers. I know it went south just because of the goaltending and stuff. But
the year before, though, weren't you a little worried the year before? There were talks that maybe Sullivan could be on the outs that year before.
I was a little bit, just because I don't think he should be anywhere close to being fired. He's not the reason why this team has had a few first-round exits in a row. I think he's just been the byproduct of really bad goaltending. And it's funny, this team's won 3 Stanley Cups in the Sid Gino era, but for as many times as they've gotten good goaltending, they've also gotten really bad goaltending, probably more often than that, which is just crazy to think about with that. So I'm glad he wasn't canned, especially after the Islander series. I'm glad he was not canned after this one. At the end of the day, what it comes down to for me is that you're not going to get anyone better than him that's on the open market. And I do think if he's still here, once Sid creeps up to 40, which is crazy to think about too, and Gino and Letang, if he's still here by then, I do think he can be that coach that ushers in a new era of Penguins hockey. Obviously, they're not going to be like that perennial Stanley Cup contender, but I think he'll have them really competing hard on a nightly basis.
It depends if they tank again. They're good at tanking.
Yeah, that's very true too.
So you talked about the defense and how Pierre-Olivier Joseph has been offered to everybody. It's kind of weird because he was a decent prospect. I think there were some guys that went overboard on him, but he was always very thin and always had to put on weight. And I felt like his skating was good enough. What just didn't, in your estimation, get good enough about him to be able to be on this team? Because it's hard for me to believe that Daniel Friedman can actually be better, that Friedman could be better than him. But
It's
yeah,
funny, I know Mark Friedman does
Mark
take a
Friedman,
lot
yeah.
of crap. It is
Mhm.
funny, but he's played well in the times that he has been in the lineup.
Yeah, like he's physical, he gets
I
paid,
didn't
like,
even know who he was when Hextall made that first move. That was the thing.
Oh, we know who he is.
we do.
Yeah.
We do.
And all of a sudden he just comes in. I'm like, wow, this is actually a pretty serviceable number 7, number 8 defenseman who's fine offensively, can move the puck, defensively responsible, can play on both sides.
Only
Yeah,
plays
when
against the Flyers.
it is funny when he plays the Flyers, they seem to just hate him. I don't know if he just went out with someone's wife for a drink one night and they didn't like it. I don't know, but that's always been funny. To just whenever they play the Flyers, they just always take runs at him. But I think with POJ, I was high on him at the start, but he just hasn't proven to be an effective NHL player yet. He's come up here at times. It's been okay, but he hasn't really blown you away. He came into this year, new contract, one way. It had to be now or never for him. You're battling Ty Smith, Chad Weedle, Mark Friedman, and so far, he just hasn't, done enough yet. I feel like he has limited offense right now. He's weak physically, hasn't really learned to use his speed and length to defend as well as I thought he would. And I think that's why you're seeing him right now be a bit down on the depth chart, and why you're seeing someone like Ty Smith, who I think has had a better camp than him, the favorite to win that final left-handed spot to play with Jan Rutta, because going in, I think that was one of the biggest roster battles. Who was going to get that spot? POJ or Ty Smith, or maybe even Mark Friedman, because Ruedel, he's going to be a number 7 behind Jan Rutta. Poor Chad, by the way, plays a great season last year and then just has to go back to the bench.
Yeah.
But he just hasn't panned out the way I thought he was. And I think that's the main reason why you're seeing him in trade talks right now. If they can't trade him, they're probably going to try to stick him on waivers. They'll have to hope that he's not claimed. Because if he's not, he'll just go down to Wilkes-Barre and then they have the depth. But I think at least maybe one team could take a flyer on him if they don't want to give up like a draft pick or something like that.
Yeah, I can see it. I'm going to follow up with one more prospect question. And so Sam Poehling, this looks like it could be his year. I see that Carter's banged up. Carter is getting older and he is going to miss games. There's no question about that. And I kind of wonder if he is going to be able to take advantage of that.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, Russ. I was very surprised when I saw the cuts yesterday and he was still there. I definitely think the Penguins coaching staff and the management, they think he's had a good camp. He's moved to center. He's usually been a wing throughout his career. And I think tonight he's going to be in the lineup because Radim Zohorna got claimed. So the roster goes down to 27 now, but it's basically 25 with a couple of AHL guys hurt.
Yeah.
So he's probably one of the final 2 cuts that could be made, but they want to see how he does in varsity action. He's someone who played well in the second half of last season with Wilkes-Barre. I think was one of the leading goal scorers, if I recall correctly. And
he had something like 17 goals. It was a good year.
Yeah, I mean, it was a lot better, especially coming into the year. There were a lot of questions about him because, he was always, put out there as, oh, he's the top Penguins prospect and all this stuff, but he really hasn't been doing a lot to show that. But he's made a lot of strides over this past year. And, I'm excited to watch him tonight. That's for sure. I don't know if it's going to be enough to make the team, but he's definitely in the consideration, which is a lot more than I thought he would be at this time, to be honest with you.
Were you disappointed to see Radim Zohorna get picked up on waivers?
A little bit. I think some fans were a little overreactive about it. I think, people, they kind of just overvalue fourth liners. And, he's kind of just like that perfect 14th or 15th forward or something like that. Someone who, coming into this year was maybe going to have a shot at making the roster. But just when you look at the overall forward depth right now, I just didn't see a way he was going to be an every night player. Obviously a tall guy, long reach, good offensive instincts. I think when he was on the ice, I think he's played 230 minutes at 5v5 hockey. I saw the stat here if I can find it real quick. Penguins outscored opponents 20-3, controlled almost 60% of the expected goals rate. Very small sample size, but still really good underlying metrics. At the end of the day, it doesn't really bother me too much. I'm only really upset just because that means someone like Josh Archibald is getting a free pass to be on the roster. And I was someone who wasn't really high on that move,
Don't
especially
you
for
feel like that's a Berkey guy though? I feel like that's a, like, hey, I want Archibald, and Hextall's like, fine, we'll get him, and I just feel like that's a Berkey guy.
Basically, yeah. I was never a fan of that deal, especially from a hockey perspective, because it was signed on the first day of free agency, and it's like there are so many other good players out there, especially that are on PTOs now, and I'm like, that's the guy you're going after on day one. Just a weird talent evaluation, I think, from the front office. But overall, Rachel, yeah, I'm not really too concerned about it. Definitely a little annoyed, I guess, but I think, at the end of the day, it's just, we're talking depth players here.
Right.
Yeah, you can't get too crazy. I'm a big Ryan Poehling fan. I've followed him, all throughout his career, college and everything. And he's had some, injuries, concussions, and things like that. He's still in camp. It looks like he may have a spot on this team, and I'm wondering if he's going to be the next guy that Sullivan gets a big year out of.
I'm curious about that too. I know he's been on some bad Montreal teams. Obviously, had a hat trick in his first game.
Yeah.
I'm not super sold on him just yet. I would love to be wrong. Obviously, I bait crow on plenty of moves throughout the last few years, especially the Cody Ceci one. I didn't like that, and then he goes out and earns himself a nice payday.
Listen, Mike Matheson played okay for the Penguins, and that was a miracle. So
he played very well those last 2 years. I was very surprised by the level of hockey that he played, especially this past year when I think he had his best season of his career.
Yeah.
With Poehling, I think they see him as someone who can play on the third and fourth line. Right now, I kind of have him penciled in as that fourth line left winger, maybe with Bluger and McGinn. I think their third line, they would probably want to run out something like Heinen, Carter, and Kapanen.
To be honest, if he's healthy, I'll tell you, Poehling's got a higher offensive upside than Heinen. But that's only when he's healthy and he's right. Heinen's been in the league longer, so I get it.
That's high praise, Russ, especially since Heinen had almost 20 goals last year. So.
I know it was a big year for him, but I'm telling you, Poehling's a talent. But we'll see.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued about him. I didn't really know too much about him when they got him in the Petrie trade. I've looked at his metrics, and I'm just kind of like, is there more there? Like, can Sullivan really unlock him? They're definitely taking a chance on it just because, he didn't, his time in Montreal was just not that good. I think I've read that he was considered almost a reach when he was picked a few years ago. But maybe he surprises, scores 10 to 15 goals on the fourth line, and, is able to help, offset the loss of someone like Evan Rodriguez, who, again, I think the Penguins are still really feeling that right now.
Yeah, the one thing I'd follow up on is whoever said he was a reach, he definitely wasn't a reach. I mean, he in high school, he scored 20 goals in 25 games. Like, he was a good goal scorer in high school and in college, 14 goals with St. Cloud in 36 games. He was effective, but he just has had injuries. And I think when he gets on track, like even if you look in Laval, he had 25 points in 28 games. He would get on track. He would look good even at the NHL level, and then he'd get hurt. I think that's really been the bugaboo for him. That's just my feeling.
Yeah, I mean, and again, I'd love to be wrong about him, especially because they got him in the trade. They obviously see something there if they wanted to acquire him. Not going to get many minutes, which is fine. I mean, the fourth line plays 12, 13 a night. But, he's playing with good players on that line. McGinn had double-digit goals last year. Teddy Bluger, one of the better defensive fourth-line centers in the NHL. He'll have his moments.
Bluger. I've liked him since college. He's just a fun player. He does everything.
Yeah, I really like having him as the fourth-line center. He's someone that, can kill penalties, win face-offs, chip in offensively, though I would like to see him do that a little bit more. But, if he and Poehling could potentially have form just a good partnership this year. I think the fourth line, could be a strength of this team, even though coming into this year, I kind of saw it as a bit of a weakness after the trade.
So over the past number of years, I think the Pens have had a reputation for having a stellar top six, and then the bottom six are names that nobody's ever heard of and people that don't believe are actual hockey players, but or part of Wilkes-Barre Scranton or something like that because of injuries. I know we talked about Jeff Carter being hurt, but how are you feeling going into this season in terms of actually having a stable bottom six?
It's definitely still a weakness, I think, for me. Last season, I was a lot more comfortable just because Heinen was down there. Rodriguez, Carter was still producing, even though his metrics were going down a little bit. Bluger, McGinn, all those guys, this year, you take away Rodriguez and, that's basically 20 goals that they really haven't fully replaced. And you're adding in Archibald, you're adding in Poehling. I think it's a bit weaker, at least in my opinion, from the last couple of years. I think the last 2 years, they have one of the better bottom sixes in the league. But right now, I still think they're at least one forward short in the bottom six. I would like to see them add a little more goal scoring to it, just because, you need to be able to score when the big guns are not on the ice. That was a strength of the Penguins when they won the back-to-back cups, and it was a weakness of theirs, before then when they weren't winning, because all their offense would come from the big guns. And then when the bottom six would come on in like 2013, 2014, 2015, they would just get caved in and the puck would basically never leave the defensive zone. They ended up making those changes, brought in players who could actually play hockey and score in the bottom six. And then, we all saw the result. And it's been that way the last couple of years. I'm hoping it continues this year, but I think if it's not working out the way they intended it to, towards the trade deadline, I definitely think Hextall is going to go out there and try to get another forward. He wasn't afraid of doing it last year when he went out and got Raquel. He kind of went against his usual judgment and traded some high draft picks and some prospects and stuff for a win now team. But I do think if everything is not going to plan, he will go out there and try to beef up their scoring.
So my last question for you is, if Tristan Jarry is not an all-star, is their season sunk?
That's a good.
I like Jarry, but it just seems like they don't have anything else going for them in net, and it's like almost like do or die.
Yeah, I mean, Casey DeSmith, it's up and down for him from an on ice perspective, at least. I know about all the other stuff, believe me. He had a really bad first half last year, rebounded in the second half, got hurt in the playoffs second straight year. It's very risky, obviously, to bring back the same tandem 3 years in a row. They could have went out there, gotten him a veteran backup. They decided not to, and they're going to have to live with this if it goes badly. But for Jarry, I think if he plays the way he did last year, even honestly a little bit less, they should be fine. I think he has, at least right now, a swagger to his game that, I just really haven't seen much before. He was looking like a goalie last year that was trying to, really write a redemption story after what happened against the Islanders. I've always said for this team, if they can just get usually average goaltending, they should be fine. You have the playmakers to put the puck into the back of the net. The defense is usually solid.
Seems like everybody says that every year, but nobody's confident in saying that.
That's a great point too. But I think for this team, especially with the talent they have, both on the back end and up top, if you can get average goaltending and your goalies can stay healthy, you are fine. Jarry, for what he did last year, was top 10 in goals saved above expected basically all year. Finished with, I think, like 922, 923 save percentage, something around those lines. He was very good. And if he has a season like that again this year, he's probably going to make a lot of money on his next contract, whether that's from Pittsburgh or it's from somewhere else. But they do need him to be good. If he's below average, which again, goaltending is very volatile. You can't ever predict what's going to happen with it just because it's so random. Then I do think this team will be a lot more trouble than some, including myself, would think.
Yeah, I think the Pens are going to be a huge part of a playoff race down the stretch because the top of the division is by no means certain. It's going to be an interesting year in the Metro, at least at that end of things. I think we kind of know a little bit more about where the Flyers will end up than the Pens. But Hunter, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Where can people find you?
Yeah, so you can, if you are a Flyers fan and you want to follow a Penguins podcaster on social media and stuff, you can follow me on Twitter at Hunter Hodes. The show's Twitter is at @LO_Penguins. You can find the show wherever you listen to your podcast, Apple, Spotify. You can also watch it on YouTube and all that stuff. And of course, we have episodes out Monday through Friday. The season is 10 days away, at least for the Penguins, and it can't get here soon enough because if I have to keep talking about training camp with all these roster battles, I think I'm going to collapse at some point.
We're getting there. All right. Thanks, Hunter.
Yep. Thank you.